Good day, viewers. Welcome back to the Preaching Humanist with David Oliverio. That is I. Today is episode number 4. Hope you've enjoyed the first 3 episodes. I'm going to get right into it today. We are going to discuss morality, ethics and morality. And you can actually be ethical and moral without a God. And that's the premise today. So this is entitled Morality 101. Before I get into the juicy part of the sermon, I'm going to give you a few examples of dialogues I've had with believers through the many, many years that I have been out there talking to you Christians. So examples I like to use, little case studies I love to do. This is how my mind is wired. The first 10 to 15 years of my life as an atheist, I was a closet atheist. I had to do that. I had 2 kids when they were younger. I didn't want to affect their relationship with their friends in school. I didn't want them to be repudiated or ostracized. So I kept my big mouth shut. Moved to Austin, where I'm at now, the great city of Austin, Texas, about 9-10 years ago. Then I came out of the closet after my kids went off to college, and they're big boys and girls now, and I have grandkids. Now, little case studies I did. The first time I was ever around a group of fellow humanists and atheists, about 9 years ago. Very interesting. I saw things that I never thought were humanly possible based on my former philosophy of Christianity. I saw human beings, a homogeneous species, all the same. We required love. We're social, gregarious, tribal, primate, big-brained, bipedal species. And I noticed among these fellow freethinkers and atheists something I used to notice in my church days as a young preacher in my entire first 30 to 35 years of my life as a Christian. I noticed that these fellow human beings that are atheists like myself and humanists, they were happy. Many of them were holding and hugging their children. Oh, God forbid. And they had empathy and sympathy for each other. Daddies were holding their children. They were smiling. They were hugging each other. They were around people of coincidental philosophies like any other group of people. And I began to find out and tell myself and notice this. Hey, this reminds me of my years in church. I used to believe that anybody outside of the Christian bubble, outside of Christianity, was incapable of happiness, incapable of being kind to each other, loving their children. Go! What a concept, right? You need a Jesus for that? You really don't. I do case studies like this over and over again. I'm going to tell you another one I do before we get into the teaching on morality and ethics. Another case study I've done, and I continue to do this one, and this is really, really interesting. What I do, after I have dialogue with an individual, maybe 2 or 3 times, enough for them to see what type of person I am, because we're supposed to judge people on our character, not on whether they believe in a God or not. At least that's what I do. I judge people based on their character and their actions. So what I normally do is I go to an individual, say if it's at a convenience store where I purchase gasoline, yada, 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 and I ask them, hey, you've seen me come in here 2 or 3 times a week. We've had friendly dialogue for a few months now, however long it's been. And I'm going to ask you a question. It's a multiple choice questions. I want you to tell me, to the best of your knowledge, based on our dialogue, what you think the best answer is. Number 1, do you think I'm a born-again, fundamentalist, Bible-believing, very serious Christian, really into the Bible? Number 2, do you think I'm a New Ager? Number 3, do you think I'm a Buddhist? Or number 4, would you think I'm kind of like an atheist or agnostic? 5 in a row this past year I've done. They look at me and they normally say, oh man, come on, that's a no-brainer. You're a Christian. No-brainer. And I said, okay, before I tell you the truth, whether it was A, B, or C, or D, I would like to know why you believe for me to be a fundamentalist, seriously minded, committed Christian. And every answer from just about everybody I've talked to through the years have been, well, you're nice. Friendly. You seem interested. You seem happy. Well, thank you, thank you, thank you. Human, 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 human. And I explained to them, a lot of people outside your philosophy are capable of kindness and love and empathy and sympathy and moral and ethical behavior. And when I tell these people the truth, that I'm not a Christian, I am an overt, evangelistic, atheist humanist. And wow, you should see the looks on their face. It always blows their mind. They have this dubious look on their face. They're confused and they don't understand. So I think our culture in this country, in America, US of A, through the pervasiveness of this Christian message that human beings are incapable of kindness and love without a God, it's got to be stopped. It's time someone stands up against this and says, no, enough is enough. You don't need a God for this. Another case study I do quite a bit. Well, this is not a case study. Quick little story. Lady in my apartment complex in the laundry room, a couple weeks ago. Asked her how she was doing. She told me her life is turning out pretty bad. Things in her life are not going well. And I asked her, well, what do you plan on doing? Using the Socratic method with her, right? I said, what do you plan on doing to get your life back on track? And she said, I want to become a better person. I want to be more moral and ethical. I said, well, good for you. And how do you proceed to go about that? What are your objectives here? How to get to this goal? And of course, she said, I'm going to start hanging around Christians and going back to church. I said, well, good for you. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Can you be good without a God in your life? And my answer is, oh, hell yeah. Okay. So number one, let's talk about, briefly go over Morality 101. And I'm going to try to stick to the notes before I get into some good old Holy Ghost preaching, all right? So number one, what is morality? And this is a really basic, simple concept. You should be able to comprehend this, my dear Christian friends. Morality is doing what is right, regardless what you are told. Where Christian religious dogma is doing what you're told, no matter what is right. I choose rational morality, which is a code of ethics required by mankind for our survival, well-being, and happiness. Christian morality is a little different. It's also a code of ethics, but you say it was invented or created by a deity. These are laws you should follow. So we're going to talk about the difference today. So morality is doing what is right regardless of what you are told. Ethics. This one's going to sound a little utilitarianistic to some of you, but I think it's probably one of the best definitions I've ever found for ethics. It's a set of behavioral guidelines aimed at maximizing cooperation and minimizing conflict. I think that kind of makes sense to most of us. And through the ages and through the many, many years we've been on this planet, through the natural selection of evolution, thousands of years, even hundreds of thousands of years to millions of years, we have learned to become moral and ethical creatures. And I believe natural selection has chosen this. So I am not going to get into the depths of science today. I'm not a scientist. I just want to give you enough information to whet your appetite, my dear Christian friend, for you to explore, to go to your public library, and to dig deeper, and to look for the natural explanations for these supernatural claims that you say exist. We have answers for these things. Why be moral? It's a question I get from Christians all the time. Well, David, I mean, come on. You're an atheist. Why would you even want to be moral? And I want to facepalm every time I hear this because it just drives me absolutely freaking crazy. What do you mean, why be moral? Study nature, study anthropology, study evolutionary biology and sociology. It explains very clearly. We are moral creatures because we are social and gregarious for group, cohesion, and survival. Look at other animals in the animal kingdom, other than the human animal. Look at a pride of African lions on the Serengeti plains of Africa. Look how they have in-group morality and out-group ferocity. This is Philosophy 101. Within their tribe or their group or their clan, those few males and the many females, the lionesses, within their group there is structure. There is morality. They take care of each other. Outside of that circle, there's not a lot of morality. They fight against other clans, other prides. It's all for group cohesion and survival. Humans are the same way. But we have outgrown that. We have big, big brains. We are primates. Chimpanzees are closest relatives. The common chimp of Africa and the bonobo chimp, both very moral and ethical within their group. Outside the group, ferocity. We are able to expand our morality and ethics as we mature as human beings and use reason. So why be moral? For group cohesion and survival of the species. We know that, and we don't need a God for that. Now, understand that moral philosophy has been taught hundreds and even thousands of years prior to Jesus, prior to Christianity. And pretty soon I'm going to actually teach on mythologies and how Christianity is no different than all the other primitive mythologies out there. So, moral philosophy, Aristotle, Socrates, Plato, Epicurus, Lucretius. You can go back hundreds of years prior to Jesus and the Bible. And you got Confucius. You've got cultures back in India, predating Christianity for thousands of years. There were prohibitions and morality and ethical behavior within the group for group cohesion and group survival. Do not need a God for this. Now, you may have heard of a guy named King Hammurabi. And all you historians out there, I apologize if I've destroyed his name. 1750 BCE. Christians, you call it before Christ. We call it before Common Era, BCE. 1750 years, which is 2,700 years ago, if I'm doing my math right, maybe that's wrong, but a long time ago, prior to Christianity, there was a guy named King Hammurabi who inscribed upon a 7-foot slab of stone prohibitions and laws for ethical and moral behavior among the citizens of this Babylonian culture that he was a king of. He was a king of Babylon. And upon those codes and ethics, upon that slab of stone, we have laws that you find in your holy book, the Bible. A tooth for tooth, an eye for an eye. Well, praise the Lord, that's found in the Bible, David. The Old Testament has already written that in there. Sorry, guys and girls out there, my dear Christian friends. This came hundreds of years prior to the Bible. You will find prohibitions for years and years and years of things that human behavior would be detrimental to human behavior and so forth. So we understand these things through science. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the good stuff. I've been waiting on this for a while. I like to say when I talk to Christians, this is called the riddle of obligation. Philosophy 101, my dear Christian friends, and listen to me very closely. The riddle of obligation. Would your morality collapse if God, being the grounds for this morality, were absent? If you found out that this crazy old preaching humanist dude on YouTube was right, and there's really no evidence for God, what would happen, my dear Christian friend, to these moral and ethical virtues you say are Christian? What would happen to your lifestyle? Would your morality collapse and dissipate and be eradicated if you found out there was no God? You'd be surprised the answers I get from my dear Christian friends when I talk to you guys. The other day, I was talking to a young man younger than my kids, probably in his early or mid-20s. I asked him the riddle of obligation. He told me, I would rape, I would pillage, I would steal. He said this. I said, no, you would. He goes, sure I would, because Jesus gives me this morality and ethical behavior. Now, I could have said one or two things to him. I could have said, well, then you are an immoral piece of, can I say it? Piece of shit. I could have said it to him, but I said, you know what? As a humanist, I believe most of us are good in human nature. I think that you believe and been told through this book that you can't be good without Jesus. You're born in sin. You're born immoral because it's what somebody else did in a garden 6,000 years ago, coexisting with Tyrannosaurus Rex in a magical garden with a talking snake. You think you'd be evil, but you wouldn't, unless you're a psychotic, or unless you were extremely religious and fanatical, because then you would probably hear voices and do what the Lord tells you to do. Morality is doing what is right, regardless what you are told. Think about that, my dear Christian friend. The riddle of obligation. Let's take a step further. Would your kindness, your empathy, your sympathy, your compassion, the 7 C's of character, your conscience, your internal moral compass, your caring, Would all these virtues you say are Christian within you, would they collapse if you found out that this was all a hoax? And that's what I'm trying to tell you. It is. It's a mythology. Would you continue to be moral and ethical? Think about it, my dear Christian friend. I'm trying to get you to think. I'm trying to get you to be objective in your thinking, away from this primitive book and into reason and the life of kindness and love and rationality. So, the riddle of obligation. Now, I want you to take your Bibles with me. And I love this part of it because it brings back memories when I was a young preacher. And I've got my good old book here. Of course, the new title, I've already showed you this in episode 1. The Adult Book of Fairy Tales, Fables, Absurdities, and Atrocities. So turn with me, if you will, to Genesis chapter 22. And let's see what your holy moral book tells you. Now, I'm going to read the story of Abraham and Isaac. And bear with me here. And you know what? I'm going to tell you something real quick. The reason I go ahead and try to reach Christians, I use a method that most of you are very accustomed to and acclimated to. It's called proclamation. It's called expository teaching. That's what you're used to. This is how I'm hoping to reach you. Now, if I were a scientist sitting here and going over the details of science, how the natural world works versus the supernatural world, you would probably turn me off. But maybe I'm hoping to get through because, hey, this guy sounds like my preacher at church. I might can listen to him for 30 minutes. So, yeah, I'm trying to become a little more maybe like you, any way I can to get you to start thinking and not faithing. So, my dear Christian friends, get off your freaking knees. Have some self-respect. You're a human. Stop faithing, stop praying, and start thinking. Genesis chapter 22. Now, it came about after these things that God tested Abraham. Whew, I could stop right there and preach. Tested Abraham? Testing? Okay. I thought he knew everything. Why would you want to test somebody? He said unto him, Abraham. And Abraham said, Here I am. And God said, Take now your son. Keep this in mind, you fathers out there, you Christian believers. You have children? Think about this. Take your son, your only son, whom you love. You think? It's called love, human love. And go to the land of Moriah and offer him, your son, there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I tell you. Now, I could stop and elaborate on this for hours. Asking a man to take his child, this boy was probably 12 or 13 years old, and offer him as a human blood gut sacrifice to this God. What is it about this deity that you created in your mind, my dear Christian friends? Primitive man and their human sacrifices. What is it about this bloodthirsty deity of yours? When Noah came off the ark with 2 of every kind, right, that makes sense, right? He began to make sacrifices to appease Jehovah. Now, think about this, my dear Christians. You have a male and female in each species. The Bible clearly says in the book of Genesis, he took turtle doves, oxen, and other various animals and sacrificed them to God. Then how did they procreate and proliferate if they were destroyed, if there were only one male and one female? Duh. Back to the story. Human sacrifice. Your child. How is this moral? Again, Christian religious dogma is doing what you're told no matter what is right. I choose rational morality, doing what is right regardless what you are told. Any father out there, listen to me. I have 2 children, adults, 2 grandchildren. I don't care who would tell me to take my son or my grandson and plunge a knife deep into his chest and kill him. I don't care who told me. I don't care if it were a God. I would have given him, and this is what Abraham should have done, if this story is true. Of course it's true, David. It's in the Bible. I would have given him the double barrel. Now, I don't want to offend anybody, so I'm using these fingers instead of the other one. Double barrel, buddy boy. This is not love. Asking someone to kill your child. Excuse me, a cat just jumped up on the table. He's listened to my word. Maybe he's going to come to humanism and let go of his cat worship, the cat god worship. So let me go on with this. Let's see what happens here in the story. And God tells him to take his son. So Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took his son with him. Okay, let's move down to verse 9. Then they came to the place of which God had told him. And Abraham built the altar there and arranged the wood and bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar. Oh, it's disgusting. On top of the wood. And Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to kill his son. Oh, it's a moral God we serve. Hallelujah. God's got a reason for this. He stretched out his hand to kill his son. And the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And Abraham said, yes, it is I. As if the angel didn't know that. Here I am. And he said, do not stretch out your hand against the lad and do nothing to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Makes no sense, people. Morality is doing what is right, regardless of what you're told. Could you imagine the emotional trauma, the psychological negative effects upon a young 12 or 13-year boy the rest of his life? Could you imagine being tied up as a burnt offering? Could you imagine the psychological trauma that the father would have gone through, his God telling him to kill his son? This is not moral, my dear friends. And if you get anything from this message, read the book. Most Christians don't know the book. Read the book and come back and tell me if you still think this is a moral book. That's what I want you to do. That's why most atheists, like myself, know the book better than most of you do. We know this book, and we have figured this out. This is not moral. All right. I've already gone over Christian morality and rational morality. Now, what I want to offer you, Christians, and I'm going to end here shortly. I thought I'd go longer than this, but I'm not. So that's good. I want to keep it short. I want to offer you, Christians, a way out. You're saying, what the hell are you talking about? I want to talk to you, Christians, that know that you're sitting there Sunday mornings. You're listening to your preacher go over stories like I just read in the book of Genesis. And instead of this preacher stopping and going over and explaining how this is an immoral act, some of you have these questions. Some of you have this skepticism going on in your mind. And you want to raise your hand and you want to question and go, how is this moral? But you don't. But you're thinking. I got a quick story for you. This is another true one. When I was probably 23 or 24, I was on staff at my father's church in Waco back in the late 70s and early 80s. This is before I went out on my own into my own evangelism, traveling and preaching, and starting 2 churches of my own in my 20s and early 30s. And I was teaching a newcomers class for new Christians to the church my dad was pastor at. I was kind of an associate pastor with my brother. So it was kind of the mafia type thing, a family type thing. So I was teaching a newcomers class. I was going over the atrocities, I would have never said that back then, but now the atrocities of the Old Testament God. And by the way, Christians, please don't give me, oh, David, these atrocities of the Old Testament, the conquest of Canaan, the slaughtering the Jebusites, the Hivites, the Hittites, the Philistines, and all the things that the Israelites did because God told them to. That's real moral there, Bubba. This is the Old Testament. It's better than the New Testament, my dear Christian friend. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, I'm quoting from your book, today, and forever. I am the Lord God in the Old Testament, and I change not. It's the same God as the Old and the New Testament. When you read these horrific stories of genocide and infanticide and immorality in the Old Testament, it's the same God in the New Testament. Jesus hasn't changed. God hasn't changed. The covenant was changed. And now, instead of the blood of bulls and goats, you have the blood of Christ, right? I go over all this. You've been beat to death with the gospel message. I don't need to preach that to you, this mythology. So, think about these things, my dear Christian friends. That morality is within you as humans. So, back to the story. So, I'm going over the conquest of Canaan in this newcomers class. All ages of human beings in this class. I noticed that one of my best friend's father was in the class, kind of a known skeptic. He didn't really go for all the Christian stuff. You could tell he was just sitting there kind of shaking his head. So here I was, this young fireball preacher, young man thinking I knew everything, right? Oh, I had the bull by the horns, life by the horns. I was going to conquer and be the next Billy Graham or Jimmy Swaggart. I was going to play my piano and preach the Holy Ghost, and thousands of people would come to Jesus. Right, it really happened. So I'm talking about the conquest of Canaan, how God commanded Joshua and Caleb to march across the Jordan because Moses couldn't go. He was disobedient. So God commanded Joshua and Caleb. You know the story in the book of Joshua and Judges. Joshua and Caleb, I, the Lord, have commanded thee to go across the river Jordan and to take the promised land. Don't just share it with these people. Don't be a kind, loving, moral, and ethical human being. I just want you to go, and I want you to slaughter, kill every man, woman, and child. Take the little babies and kill them. Hell, kill the cattle and the horses as well. I want you to take the swords, you Israeli soldiers, and I want you to slice the pregnant women open with its knife. Take the fetus out, chop it in half. I want you to take the little toddlers by the ankles and smash their heads against the stones. Blessed is he who smashes thy little ones' heads against the stone, the psalmist said in the book of Psalms. This was in your book. It's in your book, people. So I'm going over the atrocities of this immoral God. I used to think it was all moral because, David, come on. These Philistines and Jebusites were worshiping other gods. Do you know what their crime was? To be slaughtered and killed by this moral God. Wink, wink. They had other gods because thou shalt not have any other gods before me. God punished and killed them. So I'm telling the stories on how the Israelites marched across Canaan land and killed every man, woman, and child, and all the atrocities that happened in the Old Testament. And all of a sudden I saw this middle-aged man, one of my best friend's father, sitting there shaking his head like this, going, and finally he raised his hand, and this is the only time in, 12 or 13 years of being a young preacher full-time, anybody ever questioned me, had enough gall and nerves and skepticism and intellect, obviously, to raise his hand and go, excuse me, David. I said, yeah, brother so-and-so. Of course, it was brother back then. He said, I don't get it. It just doesn't seem right. It does not seem moral for God, the Christian God, to order Joshua and Caleb to kill men, women, and children, and also take the young virgins as sex slaves. Oh, this is a moral book, David. If you just knew that God had a plan. God's ways are far above our ways as the heavens are above the earth. So are his thoughts above my thoughts. Well, if this God is real, which he can't be, no God could be so immoral. No God could be so ignorant and stupid. Why would you even want to follow a God like this? Why would you want to follow somebody like this? And you know what my answer to him was? Oh, brother so-and-so. Justification. You remember last week we talked about how faith can justify anything? And it can. I said, my dear brother, these people were a type of sin. God had to show that he's intolerant of any other deity but him. So instead of just being kind and helpful and loving of other human beings with different opinions, he had them killed. One more thing before we end. I want to end with this, Christians. I know most of you are thinking, well, David, if you only knew Jesus, you would understand his ways. I've already been there. I've done that. I've been there and done that, my dear Christian friend. The New Testament that you read, red letter edition, King James Holy Bible, is actually more immoral in the New Testament than the Old Testament. The Old Testament was immoral. Oh, sure, the Israelites killed and slaughtered and took sex slaves commanded by God. The New Testament's worse. Now the loving, kind, gentle, meek Jesus comes on the scene. And after the Sermon on the Mount, that's about the only Jesus I like, where the long-haired hippie dude Jesus talked about love. The rest of what Jesus said, I'm not too big of a fan. Now, instead of being killed by the swords of the Israelites, now you are punished forever in the fire that never quencheth, the fire that never stoppeth, where the worm never dieth and the fire is not quenched, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. The very words of Jesus, punishment forever for those that do not trust in the Lord Jesus Christ. That's the gospel message. I'm asking you one more time, Christians, please use your human conscience. Use your internal moral compass. Think for one moment, if it's possible for you to get away from faith for one moment and think, is this really moral? Do I want to follow this book as a guideline for morality and ethical behavior? Like Bill Maher said so beautifully in Religulous, his hilarious movie. He said, I find more morality in the Rick James Bible than I do the King James Bible. Come on, people. Start thinking. Get off your knees. Have some self-respect. Be proud to be a human. You have moral and ethical behavior built into our very nature. In fact, I could get into science a little deeper and say we're born basically amoral. We have the ability to be moral or immoral. Every tool available within you, my dear Christian friends, we have within us as humans. We can choose moral teaching and philosophy and live a wonderful life of kindness and love, all without a God. The last thing I say, and I'm ending right now because 30 minutes is up exactly now. Remember, if you remember anything I said today, remember this. The riddle of obligation. Would your morality collapse if God, being the grounds for this morality, were absent? And remember, do case studies. Go out and talk to people from different philosophies that have different gods, like I do. I talk to Hindus. I forgot to tell you that story, but I've also done case studies with some of my Hindu clients from India who believe in Vishnu, Shiva, and Krishna. I've been invited over to their homes for dinner. You meet their families, their grandparents, their parents, their children, everybody else in the family. Strong Hindus. Guess what? The same thing. You're in a group of human beings. There's love. There's kindness. There's parents who love their children. There's cooperation between each other, just like you Christians have. Why is that? Because we're human. It's intrinsic in our nature to love each other, to be kind, and to be moral. Thank you for watching. I'm going to close. I've been yakking for 31 minutes. I've gone a minute over. So thank you for watching the Preaching Humanist with David Oliverio. That is I, from the great city of Austin, Texas. So I encourage you to watch, send comments, whatever you want to do. I can handle it. I'm a big boy. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you next week on the Preaching Humanist with David Oliverio. Next week I'll surprise you with episode number 5. Have a wonderful day.